each of the sectors and then dive into what needs to be done going forward to try and revive the economy. So that if you can kickstart this conversation by explaining what's been happening largely in the media sector, how much of an impact are you seeing as a result of the pandemic, and what are the trends you're noticing at this moment?
Thank you, Rahul, first of all, for that flattering introduction. We go back a long time, and since then you become bigger, more powerful, and more influential, and more power to you. On the question, I think media sector has seen an unprecedented devastation. Between the three segments of entertainment, news and information, and live sports, two of them are totally shut, and those are the much bigger segments, as you know. And there is no film shooting happening, there is no television production happening, there is no live sports happening. News is the only thing that's working. And on the advertising side, if you see this, because there is no manufacturing, no distribution, no retailing, as a result of that, there is really very little advertising happening. So, the advertising sector is somewhat of a bellwether sector. It represents what happens to the industry, and it generally tells you the story earlier than any other sector. So, because the first thing that people do when tough times come is to cut down their advertising, because if they don't see that there is a purpose to advertising by way of selling more goods, they start cutting down on that. And we've seen widespread discontinuation of advertising all over. So, advertising today is barely 20% of the normal levels. And going forward, we suspect that it might get even worse.
Rashesh Shah, can you give us a sense of what's happening in the financial services sector, especially in the stock markets? We've seen after an unprecedented fall in April, there's been a sharp rise just over the past few weeks, and people are wondering, scratching their heads and wondering what's changed so dramatically. Leave what happened today, but broadly, how are you making sense of the jump that we're seeing and what's been happening in your view in the financial services sector?
I think overall, as Uday said, this is a very unprecedented environment, and I think April 2020 will go down in history as a month that I don't think anybody in business or industry has ever experienced. A lot of companies, their revenues came down to zero. Companies were almost in a shock. So I think when this started around the last week of March, which also happened to be the end of the financial year for us, which is a very crucial week in any case, I think there was a state of shock, and investors all over the world, not just in India, just could not comprehend or understand how much impact, how much devastation this is going to cause. But what has happened in the last few weeks in India and globally, a lot of the interventions have happened. The Reserve Bank of India, the government of India is working, other governments, other central banks have stepped in and at least assured that they are prepared to do whatever it takes. Of course, we in India need to do a lot more, and we can talk about it on liquidity as well as stimulus and all. But I think April gave a sense of comfort that things may not will get very, very bad, not as much as the markets and investors had panicked earlier, but it will be painful.
But what's giving the markets hope? Because at this moment, you don't know how soon industrial activity will kickstart. Demand is uncertain. We don't know when consumers will go back to markets, start purchasing, and yet somehow the stock markets seem to believe that things aren't quite as bad as everyone believes they are. So what is it that the stock market's figuring that nobody else is?
See, again, I think, markets are always hard to understand because so many voices get synthesized out there. But I think overall what happened in April is what I'm saying. I think in March and early April, people panicked. They expected the worst. I think now the sense is, A, with the Reserve Bank and other central banks stepping in, people think there is a floor to how bad economic activity can get. B, people know that things were as bad as they can get in April. And, very often the markets are forward-looking rather than backward-looking. What you said is absolutely right. Consumers may not come back. The panic and confidence will take time. But we saw this in April. April was the month with zero sales for most industries. Auto industry had zero sales in April. So will maybe as bad as April, maybe it will be a slight improvement over April. and with the interventions from central banks and government and interest rates coming down, especially for India, I think the three good things that are happening for India is one is oil prices have come down. In the long term, this is great for India. B, inflation has always been a problem, and we are no longer talking about inflation. So RBI is free to cut rates, inject liquidity without really worrying about inflation. And three, as the global supply chains reorient themselves away from China, just from a risk diversification point of view, India could be, and I should say could be, not automatically we will be, but India could be one of the beneficiaries
Okay.
of that. So after the initial shock is over, people are saying maybe things will not get as bad as we feared, but it will be painful, but it will improve.